At a sun-baked BBQ joint off Interstate 40 in rural Tennessee, what began as casual intimidation erupted into one of the most remarkable tales of redemption when the Thunderbolt Riders thought they'd found an easy target in a petite woman in scrubs. They never expected to encounter Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a decorated combat trauma nurse with 3 tours in Afghanistan, who was about to teach them that true strength flows not from fear, but from healing broken spirits. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The smoky aroma of hickory-grilled ribs drifted through the late afternoon air at Big Jim's BBQ Pit, a weathered roadside establishment that had served truckers and travelers for 4 decades. Sarah's navy blue scrubs were still crisp despite her 12-hour shift at the VA Trauma Center, her silver caduceus pin gleaming under the setting sun. After losing 2 patients that morning, young veterans struggling with injuries from a recent training accident, she'd needed this moment of solace, this taste of normalcy. Checking her watch, 6:45 p.m., Sarah adjusted her medical bag, feeling the familiar weight of the stethoscope and trauma shears inside. Among the standard equipment was a small, handcrafted prayer shawl she'd picked up from a village elder in Kandahar, a gift for her grandmother's 80th birthday next week. The old woman had raised her after her parents' accident, supporting Sarah's dream of becoming a nurse, even when others said she was too small, too gentle for combat medicine. The parking lot was quieter than usual for a Friday evening. Just a few pickup trucks and a line of gleaming motorcycles parked haphazardly near the entrance. The neon open sign flickered, casting an intermittent red glow across the gravel lot as families hurried to their cars, avoiding eye contact with the leather-clad group lounging by their bikes. Sarah's combat-trained instincts automatically assessed the situation. 8 riders, all wearing patches identifying them as the Thunderbolt Riders, a group known for causing trouble along this stretch of highway. Their leader, a towering woman with flame-red hair and a scorpion tattoo crawling up her neck, passed around a bottle of clear liquid that definitely wasn't water. An elderly couple approached the entrance, then stopped abruptly. The woman clutched her husband's arm as they turned away, seeking dinner elsewhere. Sarah watched as a young waitress scurried past the bikers, her face flushing as crude comments followed her retreat inside. Sarah could have taken her food to go, could have found another place to eat. But 3 tours in combat hospitals had taught her that walking away from intimidation only fed its growth. Sarah's fingers brushed against the combat medic patch she kept in her bag, a reminder of the lives saved and lost under mortar fire. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the smallest hands can lift the heaviest burdens. The same hands that had sutured wounds under Taliban fire, that had cradled dying soldiers as they spoke their last words to loved ones back home, now curled into determined fists. The tallest rider, whom the others called Phoenix, noticed Sarah watching. She nudged her companions, pointing at the scrubs with a mocking gesture. Even from this distance, Sarah could read her lips as she made a disparaging comment about playing nurse. Sarah maintained her steady pace, her mind automatically cataloging details just as she'd been trained. The leader's stance suggesting military background, 2 by the door with hands concealed, 3 others showing signs of recent injuries poorly tended. As Sarah approached the entrance, her steps measured and confident, she knew this confrontation would end differently than the riders expected. In the trauma ward and on the battlefield, she'd learned that true power isn't in causing pain, it's in knowing how to heal it. And these riders, with their obvious wounds both physical and spiritual, were about to discover that sometimes the most profound strength comes wrapped in surgical gloves and compassion. Sarah paused at a calculated distance from the group, close enough to show confidence, far enough to maintain tactical advantage. The evening sun cast long shadows across the gravel lot as Phoenix pushed herself off her motorcycle, unfolding to her full 6-foot-plus height. The leader's leather vest bore patches from multiple motorcycle clubs, each one a testament to alliances and enemies made across state lines. "Well, look what we've got here," Phoenix's voice carried across the parking lot, a rasp that spoke of too many cigarettes and hard miles. A little nurse coming to play with the big girls. The other riders formed a loose semicircle, their boots crunching on gravel as they positioned themselves around Sarah. A young woman with a half-healed gash above her eyebrow, improperly sutured, Sarah noted professionally, stepped forward, phone raised. "Maybe we should make a video," she sneered. "Show everyone what happens when Barbie thinks she can handle the real world." Sarah's trained eye caught more details. Phoenix favoring her left side, suggesting recent rib injury. 2 riders showing signs of infection in poorly treated road rash. Another with telltale tremors of someone in early withdrawal. Each observation filed away, potentially useful. "Ladies?" Sarah's voice remained calm, carrying the same tone she used in triage when seconds meant survival. "I'm just here for dinner. We can all enjoy our evening without complications." Her words were measured, professional. The same voice that had talked down shell-shocked soldiers and desperate civilians. Phoenix took another step forward, her breath carrying the sharp tang of cheap whiskey. "You know what I think about healthcare workers?" She turned to her crew, encouraging their laughter. "I think they're all just playing doctor, acting all superior while the rest of us suffer." The BBQ joint's security camera blinked steadily, its red light a silent witness. The young waitress had disappeared inside, probably calling the sheriff. Good. Having documentation could make this easier or harder, depending on how it played out. "I spent 3 tours in Afghanistan," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying that unique tone of authority that only comes from commanding emergency trauma units under fire. "I've treated everything from bullet wounds to birth complications. I'm not here to prove anything, but I am here to eat." Phoenix's eyes narrowed as she noticed the combat medic patch partially visible in Sarah's open bag. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe respect, crossed her face before being buried under bravado. "Afghanistan? That's supposed to impress us? We've got our own war zones right here." Sarah shifted her weight slightly, settling her medical bag more securely. Her grandmother's prayer shawl was well protected. It would survive whatever came next. She'd learned in combat that the moments before violence were crucial. They determined not just how things would end, but how far things needed to go before ending. "Last chance," Sarah said, her voice carrying to the edges of the parking lot. "Walk away now. We all have dinner in peace. No paperwork, no complications." The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, nature's warning colors. Phoenix's face flushed red with anger or alcohol, probably both. She reached for Sarah's scrubs, fingers curling into claws. "Time to teach you what real pain looks like, nurse." Time seemed to slow down, just as it did in trauma situations when every second meant life or death. Sarah could see everything with crystal clarity. The poor balance, the telegraphed movement, the openings in their formation. These women were used to intimidating civilians, not facing someone trained to handle mass casualties under enemy fire. What happened next would transform not just this evening, but the lives of everyone involved. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the most important battles aren't the ones you fight. They're the ones you heal instead. The security camera blinked its red light steadily, about to record something these riders never expected, a lesson in true strength, and the beginning of an unlikely sisterhood dedicated to healing rather than hurting. Phoenix's hand never reached Sarah's scrubs. With movements honed by years of emergency medicine, where speed and precision meant survival, Sarah stepped slightly right, letting the larger woman's momentum carry her forward into empty space. Her combat hospital training had taught her that the best way to handle aggression was to let it exhaust itself. "What the?" Phoenix stumbled, her face registering shock as her target seemed to simply disappear from where she'd been standing. 2 of her riders rushed forward while others spread out, trying to surround Sarah. To the handful of customers watching from inside the BBQ joint, it might have looked like a coordinated attack. To Sarah, it was a textbook example of how not to approach someone with battlefield medical training. "Think about what you're doing," Sarah said calmly, her hands still relaxed at her sides. Her eyes tracked every movement, noting how the rider with the infected road rash was reaching into her leather jacket. The outline of a switchblade became visible for a moment. Sarah felt a wave of professional disappointment. She'd hoped to resolve this without weapons. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first rider reached her, throwing a wild punch that would have looked impressive in a bar fight. Sarah simply wasn't there when the fist arrived. The second attacker met. Similar frustration, her kick hitting nothing but air as Sarah seemed to flow between their attacks like water. Movements learned from evading mortar fire while treating patients. "Stand still, you little..." Phoenix's curse was cut short as she watched her two friends nearly collide with each other. The remaining riders hesitated, suddenly less certain about their numerical advantage. That's when the road rash rider pulled her knife, the blade clicking open under the neon lights. A truck driver waiting for his takeout order shouted a warning, and several customers rushed toward their vehicles. 5 against 1 wasn't enough? Sarah's voice carried a hint of sadness. "You needed a weapon too?" She set her medical bag carefully against the wall of the restaurant, never taking her eyes off the group. Her movements were precise, unhurried, showing years of trauma unit experience. The knife wielder grinned, showing a chipped front tooth. "Not so tough now, are you, nurse?" She moved forward, blade extended, while 2 others tried to flank Sarah. Time slowed down again, just as it did during mass casualty events when every decision could mean life or death. Sarah saw everything with crystal clarity: the knife's trajectory, the poor balance of her attackers, their obvious lack of real combat experience. These were women used to intimidating the weak, not facing someone who had treated wounds under Taliban fire. The knife came in a wild slash. Sarah stepped inside the attack, her left hand catching the rider's wrist while her right forearm came up to trap the arm. One smooth twist, and the knife clattered to the ground as its wielder let out a yelp of pain. Before anyone could react, Sarah used the woman's momentum to spin her around, creating a human shield between herself and the other attackers. "Drop her!" Phoenix shouted, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. This wasn't going according to plan. The rider in Sarah's hold struggled, but found herself unable to break free from the precise joint lock, the same hold Sarah had used to restrain delirious soldiers in the field hospital. 2 more rushed forward to help their friend. Sarah waited until the last second, then simply guided her captured opponent into them. All 3 crashed together, leather jackets squeaking against the gravel as they tried to untangle themselves. Phoenix and her remaining ally split up, trying to attack from different angles. It was a better strategy than their previous attempts, but Sarah had handled worse situations while treating multiple traumas simultaneously. Her breathing remained steady, just as it had during rocket attacks. "Having second thoughts?" Sarah asked calmly, shifting her stance to keep both attackers in view. Sweat was starting to show through Phoenix's bandana, and her friend's hands were shaking slightly. They were beginning to realize this wasn't their usual kind of fight. In the distance, police sirens approached. The BBQ joint staff had obviously called for backup, but Sarah knew this needed to end before they arrived. These women had made poor choices, but they didn't deserve to have their lives ruined over a moment of misplaced aggression. Phoenix threw one last desperate punch aimed at Sarah's face. The combat nurse deflected it with her forearm, a basic move she'd used countless times while restraining traumatized soldiers. The biker's fist hit nothing but air, and the force of her own punch threw her off balance. Before she could recover, Sarah stepped forward and used a simple wrist lock to guide her face down onto the gravel. The last standing rider backed away, her earlier confidence completely gone. She looked at her friends, 1 nursing a twisted wrist, 3 tangled on the ground, and now her leader pinned down by a nurse who hadn't even broken a sweat. "Stay back," Phoenix shouted, her voice muffled against the gravel. Sarah had her secured with minimal pressure, enough to hold but not enough to cause pain. The same technique she'd used with agitated patients in the field hospital. The rider with the chipped tooth had managed to get back on her feet. She looked at her knife lying several feet away, then at Sarah. The nurse's calm expression told her that reaching for the weapon would be a very poor decision. "Listen carefully," Sarah said, her voice clear and professional. "I'm going to let your friend up. When I do, You're all going to walk away. No one's seriously hurt, and we can keep it that way." She spoke with the authority of someone used to commanding emergency situations. The parking lot had gone quiet except for the heavy breathing of the riders and the murmur of onlookers from the restaurant windows. That's when a new voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff's Department, everyone freeze." 2 patrol cars pulled into the lot, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Deputy Chief Claire Winters stepped out, her badge catching the last rays of sunlight. Behind her, a tall man in civilian clothes emerged, Dr. James Collins, head of emergency services at the VA hospital where Sarah worked. Sarah slowly released Phoenix, stepping back to give her space to stand. The biker rose shakily, her face a mix of anger and embarrassment. Her bandana had come loose, revealing a long surgical scar above her right ear. "She attacked us!" Phoenix shouted, but her voice cracked slightly. The other riders, now all back on their feet, nodded in agreement, though none of them could quite meet Deputy Winters' gaze. Winters looked from the knife on the ground to the cell phones still recording, then to Sarah's perfectly pressed scrubs. A slight smile crossed her face as she noticed the combat medic patch in the open medical bag. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she said, her own military background evident in her bearing. "Mind telling me what happened here?" Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Collins stepped forward. "Sarah Mitchell?" he said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "I should have known it was you when they called about a nurse handling 5 attackers without causing a single injury." The riders' faces changed as this information sank in. Phoenix's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as Collins continued. "Ladies, do you know who you just tried to fight? This is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, one of our top combat trauma nurses. She ran the largest field hospital in Kandahar during the heaviest fighting of 2020. The rider with the infected road rash was still rubbing her wrist while the others tried to straighten their leather jackets and recover some dignity. Their tough girl image had been completely shattered. Last month," Collins added, clearly enjoying the moment, "she talked down 3 armed men in our ER without security present. She's who we send in when SWAT teams need a medical advisor for hostage situations." A customer filming from the BBQ joint's window whispered loudly to his companion, "That's why she moved so smooth. She's used to working under fire." Deputy Winters picked up the knife, examining it carefully. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice stern but professional. 5 of you decided to harass a decorated combat nurse, pulled a knife on her, and she still managed to subdue you without causing any serious injuries." Phoenix, who had finally introduced herself as Raven Martinez, stared at the ground, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. We didn't know," she mumbled. Sarah spoke up for the first time since the police arrived. "They made a mistake, Deputy, but no one's hurt, and I don't think they'll be making the same mistake again." Winters shared a look with Dr. Collins, then turned back to the bikers. "You know, we could press charges. Assault, attempted assault with a weapon, harassment. You'd be looking at serious time." The bikers tensed, but Winters wasn't finished. "Or," she continued, "given Lieutenant Mitchell's remarkable restraint and the fact that no one was seriously injured, maybe we handle this differently." Even Sarah turned to listen, curious about what she had in mind. "The VA hospital's trauma ward needs volunteers," Deputy Winters continued. "They're always looking for people who understand street life, who can connect with patients who don't trust the system. Veterans struggling with PTSD, accident victims, people who need someone who speaks their language." Dr. Collins nodded approvingly. 40 hours each of community service would be a good way to make amends. Plus, you might learn something about the people who serve our country. And about proper wound care," he added, glancing pointedly at the rider's infected road rash. The bikers looked up hopefully. Phoenix glanced at her friends, then at Sarah. For the first time that evening, real emotion showed on her face. We're sorry," she said, her voice genuine. "We were way out of line." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout the incident. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "we all need someone to show us a better path." The parking lot was returning to normal as customers cautiously emerged from the restaurant. Dr. Collins checked his watch. "Sarah, why don't I give you a ride home? You've had enough excitement for one evening." As Sarah retrieved her medical bag, she took one last look at the bikers. They were signing papers for their community service agreement, looking like completely different people from the troublemakers who had tried to intimidate her earlier. A young girl tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing at Sarah. "Dad? Is she a superhero?" "No, sweetheart," her father replied, smiling. "She's something better. She's a nurse who knows that the greatest victory isn't in hurting people but in healing them." Sarah smiled at the exchange, thinking of her grandmother. The old woman who had raised her would have approved of how this turned out. Sometimes the best way to honor a healer's calling isn't by fighting. It's by showing others how to stop fighting. The VA hospital's trauma ward looked nothing like what the Thunderbolt Riders had expected. Morning light streamed through large windows, illuminating a space that hummed with purpose. Veterans of various ages moved through the halls, some with visible injuries, others carrying invisible wounds. Phoenix, still wearing her leather vest but now minus the more aggressive patches, stood awkwardly with her gang members. Their usual swagger was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of uncertainty. Dr. Maria Ramirez, the ward supervisor, studied the group with knowing eyes. "Welcome to the trauma ward, ladies. I understand you'll be with us for 40 hours. She paused, noting the poorly treated injuries among them. "Though from the look of things, some of you might benefit from being here anyway." "Look," Phoenix started, her voice less confident than usual. "We don't need—" "A 19-year-old combat veteran with severe burns just came in," Dr. Ramirez interrupted, pointing to a treatment room. "She's refusing to let anyone touch her. Says she doesn't trust doctors. Think you might have better luck?" The rider with the chipped tooth, who everyone now knew as Jessie, moved closer to the door, peering in. The young woman inside sat rigid with fear, her scarred hands clenched into fists. Jessie caught herself remembering her own first hospital visit after a bad accident, how terrifying it had felt. "Yeah," she said softly. "Yeah, maybe we could help with that." Dr. Ramirez smiled because their first transformation was already beginning, and they didn't even realize it yet. The workshop door opened, and Sarah Mitchell entered, still wearing her surgical scrubs after a long shift. The Thunderbolt Riders looked up, their demeanor markedly different from that evening at the BBQ joint 2 weeks ago. Phoenix was helping a young veteran with burn scars practice her physical therapy exercises, while Jessie sat with a group of PTSD patients sharing stories of overcoming fear. "Your road rash is healing nicely," Sarah observed, noting the proper bandaging on Phoenix's arm. "You've been following the treatment protocol." Phoenix nodded, a hint of pride replacing her former defensiveness. "Been learning a lot. Not just about wound care." She gestured to the young burn victim, now sleeping peacefully. "Took 3 hours, but she finally let us change her dressings. Said she felt safer with us than the regular staff." Dr. Ramirez approached, carrying a stack of patient files. "These women have a gift," she told Sarah quietly. "They connect with patients who've given up on the system. Their rough edges, they're exactly what some of our hardest cases need." Jessie was showing a group of veterans her own scars, explaining how she'd learned to wear them as badges of survival rather than shame. The defensive postures began to fade as they slipped into genuine discussions about healing and acceptance. "Doc," Phoenix called out, wiping tears from her eyes after hearing a particularly moving story from a combat medic. 40 hours might not be enough. These people, they need us." "Is that your professional opinion?" Dr. Ramirez asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "No, it's—" Phoenix struggled with the words. "It just feels right to stay, to help, you know?" The young burn victim watched the exchange from her bed, a knowing smile on her face. She'd seen this before, how healing could change people, give them purpose. The morning stretched into afternoon. The Thunderbolt Riders found themselves sharing lunch with veterans, swapping stories about survival and recovery. The tough girl act fell away, replaced by genuine exchanges of pain and hope. Later that day, Sarah stopped by to check on their progress. She found Phoenix deep in discussion with a group of trauma survivors, while Jessie was teaching a young nurse how to approach frightened patients without triggering their anxiety. "Looks like you found your element," Sarah observed. Phoenix straightened up, adjusting her newly acquired volunteer badge. "Lieutenant Mitchell, about that night at the BBQ joint." "That night's past," Sarah cut her off. "What matters is what you do next." The biker leader nodded, looking around the busy ward. "You know, we always thought we were tough girls. But these patients, the things they've overcome." "Strength comes in many forms," Sarah replied. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone else find their strength." As the day wound down, Dr. Ramirez gathered everyone around. "Ladies, your 40 hours of service can end when you think you've paid your debt. But remember this, every patient you help, every wound you heal, every spirit you lift, that's not just community service, that's changing lives." The Thunderbolt Riders exchanged looks. Something had shifted during those hours in the trauma ward. The anger and aggression that had driven them to confront Sarah seemed distant now, replaced by something they hadn't expected to find: purpose. A week into their service, the trauma ward had become more than just punishment for the Riders. The sound of gentle conversation and occasional laughter filled the air as Phoenix worked alongside the burn victim, carefully explaining each step of the wound care process. "Try to relax," Phoenix said softly, her hands steady as she demonstrated proper bandaging technique. "The pain eases when you don't fight it." Jessie, who had removed her aggressive patches and now wore a VA volunteer badge, was showing a group of new patients the basics of anxiety management. Her gruff exterior had softened, especially when working with the younger veterans who reminded her of herself. "See, most people overthink healing," Jessie explained, gesturing to the breathing exercise chart. "But recovery is like riding. Respect the process, understand your limits, and you'll never fall too far." Dr. Ramirez watched from her office, making notes. What had started as community service was evolving into something unexpected. The bikers' street experience, combined with their growing understanding of trauma care, was creating remarkable results. The trauma ward door opened, and Deputy Winters walked in with Sarah, both finding a scene very different from what they'd expected. The former troublemakers were fully engaged, teaching, learning, and working with genuine enthusiasm. "Hard to believe these are the same women from the BBQ joint," Winters remarked quietly. A young veteran with severe anxiety was laughing at something Jessie had said, the sound echoing through the ward, genuine, unforced laughter that spoke of healing. "Sometimes people just need the right opportunity," Sarah replied. "They had the instincts all along. They just needed a better way to use them." Phoenix approached them, adjusting her new trauma care volunteer badge. The change in her was the most dramatic, the aggressive posture gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing her worth. "Lieutenant Mitchell, good timing. We've got something to show you." She led them to where the young burn victim sat, proudly displaying her healing wounds, now properly dressed with advanced burn care techniques. "First successful solo dressing change today," Phoenix reported. "She's going to be ready for reconstructive surgery next week." The treatment room had been transformed beyond basic care. The walls now displayed encouraging messages and photos of recovery milestones, a testament to the patient's progress. "This is way beyond 40 hours of work," Winters observed. Phoenix shrugged. "Hours stopped mattering after the first few days. This isn't about paying a debt anymore. This is about..." She gestured around the ward, searching for words. "Family," the burn victim finished for her. "These women, they don't just treat wounds. They get it. They understand what it means to need something to believe in." Sarah noticed how the other Thunderbolt Riders had gathered around, their body language completely different from that night in the parking lot. There was pride in their stance now, but not the artificial kind they'd hidden behind before. "We've been thinking," Phoenix said, looking at her friends for confirmation. "The VA's got a waiting list of trauma patients who need people who understand street life. We want to help. Not just for 40 hours, for as long as they need us." Dr. Ramirez had joined them, carrying a folder. "Actually, I have a proposal about that. The hospital's been looking to expand our trauma support program. We need full-time peer counselors, people who can speak both medical and street. who know how to connect with others who might be feeling lost. The implications hung in the air. This wasn't just about community service anymore. This was about transformation. Not just of wounds, but of lives. "You're offering us jobs?" Jessie asked, disbelief in her voice. "I'm offering you a chance to continue what you've already started," Dr. Ramirez replied. "Look around. Look at what you've accomplished in just 2 weeks. Imagine what you could do with real resources, real support." The Thunderbolt Riders looked at each other, then at the patients they'd been working with. The choice was written on their faces before anyone spoke. "The Thunderbolt Riders was about trying to prove something," Phoenix said slowly. "Maybe it's time for a new name, a new purpose." "The Healing Horde," the burn victim suggested. "But not about causing pain, about helping others find their way back to wholeness." Sarah watched as the moment sank in. This was how real change happened, not through force, but through understanding. Not through punishment, but through purpose. "One condition, Doctor," Ramirez added with a smile. "Those leather vests need new patches, ones that show who you really are now." 2 weeks after the BBQ joint incident, the trauma ward had undergone a complete transformation. The walls, once stark and clinical, now displayed photos of patients with their recovery milestones. The Thunderbolt Riders' old patches hung in a frame, a reminder of how far they'd come. Phoenix stood before a group of new trauma patients, her leather vest now sporting a different patch. "Healing Horde, strength through recovery." Behind her, Jessie was teaching a wheelchair-bound veteran techniques for managing panic attacks during physical therapy. "Each trauma is different," Phoenix explained to her audience. "Just like each of your stories is different. Our job isn't just to treat wounds, it's to understand what you need to heal." She gestured to the burn victim, now training to become a peer counselor herself. The door swung open and a group of rough-looking women entered, members of the Steel Angels, another gang known for causing trouble. But today, they came with a different purpose. "We heard about what you're doing here," their leader said, addressing Phoenix. "Word on the street is you're changing lives." Phoenix exchanged looks with Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Want the tour?" Phoenix asked, remembering her own first day. As they walked through the ward, they passed Jessie teaching a group of PTSD patients how to ground themselves during flashbacks. A veteran's face lit up as she successfully completed her first therapy session without dissociating. "That's what it's about," Phoenix explained to the visiting bikers. "Not about being tough, about making a difference." The Steel Angels watched in silence as the former Thunderbolt Riders demonstrated their latest therapy techniques, a trauma-informed approach that combined street wisdom with medical knowledge. "We've got experience with pain," one of the Steel Angels said quietly. "Maybe we could help." "Show up tomorrow at 7 a.m., Phoenix replied. "Bring your compassion and leave your attitudes at door. There's plenty of healing to go around." Meanwhile, Dr. Ramirez was meeting with hospital administrators and potential donors. The program's success had attracted attention from medical institutions interested in developing similar peer support programs. "The National Trauma Center wants to send their training team," she told Sarah and Phoenix. "They're interested in implementing your methods nationwide." The implications were huge. What had started in a BBQ joint confrontation was evolving into something that could help trauma survivors across the country. Later that afternoon, preparations for a major trauma care conference were in full swing. 20 recovered patients stood ready to share their stories, each one crediting the Healing Horde with their breakthrough moments. "Remember when we thought 40 hours was a long time?" Jessie laughed, helping a veteran through breathing exercises. The young woman looked up from her anxiety workbook, smiling. "Hard to believe you guys were the same ones from that viral video," she said. The room went quiet. Nobody had mentioned that night in weeks. "That video," Phoenix said thoughtfully, "might be the best thing that ever happened to us. Showed us who we really could be." Sarah, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "The conference committee called. They want you all in full Healing Horde gear leading the trauma-informed care presentation. The governor will be there." The former Thunderbolt Riders looked at each other, pride mixing with humility in their expressions. There's more, Sarah continued. They want you to carry the opening ceremony showing what this program is really about. The burn victim wheeled over, grinning. Hope you're ready for some attention. News crews are coming from all over to cover this. It's not about attention anymore, Phoenix replied, looking around at what they'd built. It's about showing others what's possible, about proving that anyone can change if they're given the right chance. The ward filled with the sound of recovery, gentle conversations, therapeutic exercises, and occasional laughter. Each successful session, each smile on a patient's face reinforced what the healing horde had learned. True strength isn't about intimidation, it's about inspiration. A young veteran with severe anxiety approached Phoenix. "Never thought I'd trust anyone in authority again," she said, eyes moist. "You guys, you gave me back more than just coping skills. You gave me back hope." "No," Phoenix responded, thinking about that night at the BBQ joint, about how close they'd come to taking a very different path. "You gave us something more important. You gave us purpose." The morning news crew arrived early, setting up their equipment as the healing horde prepared for their first public demonstration. Local, Channel 7's cameras focused on the burn victim as she smoothly led a group therapy session, demonstrating the seamless integration of peer support with clinical care. "What you're seeing here is revolutionary," the reporter explained to her audience. "These former gang members are transforming trauma care through their unique understanding of street life and survival." Phoenix, now comfortable in her role as program spokesperson, explained the therapeutic aspects, while Jesse demonstrated their trauma-informed approach. The Steel Angels, now regular volunteers, helped other patients showcase their recovery progress. "This isn't just about treating wounds," Phoenix explained to the camera. "It's about dignity, about understanding that healing happens in community." Sarah watched from Dr. Ramirez's office as 3 more news vans pulled into the parking lot. "Quite a change from 3 weeks ago," she remarked. "The governor's office called this morning," Dr. Ramirez replied, sorting through a stack of letters. "They want to feature the program in their healthcare initiative. And look at these." She handed Sarah a pile of emails. 15 women's organizations from across the state, all wanting to start similar programs. The trauma ward had become a hub of activity. Jesse was explaining their latest therapeutic innovation to a group of psychology students from the local university. Her former rebellious attitude had transformed into professional confidence. "The key is understanding that each survivor's needs are unique," she explained. "We're not just treating trauma, we're customizing healing paths for individual journeys." A commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A group of healthcare executives entered, led by the director of the National Trauma Center. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Ramirez announced, "meet our new partners. They're here to discuss taking our peer support program nationwide." The executives moved through the ward, clearly impressed by what they saw. They stopped at the burn victims therapy group, watching as she led a breakthrough session with remarkable skill. "This is beyond anything our traditional programs have achieved," the director admitted. "We want to implement this model across the country, make it available to trauma survivors everywhere." Phoenix looked at her team, seeing in their faces the same mix of pride and humility she felt. "One condition," she said to the executives. "Every program has to be adaptable. No one-size-fits-all solutions. Each survivor's journey is different." "That's exactly why we're here," the director replied. "We don't just want your methods. We want your understanding, your insight into what survivors really need." As the meetings continued, Jesse led another group of patients through their trauma recovery class. The sight of the formerly aggressive biker patiently guiding survivors through their healing process had become normal, but it still made Sarah smile. "You know what's really amazing?" Jesse said during a break. "Remember how we used to think respect came from making people fear us? Now we're earning real respect just by helping others heal." The afternoon brought more visitors, representatives from trauma centers in other states, eager to learn how to replicate the program. They watched as the healing horde worked, noting how seamlessly the former gang members interacted with patients, medical staff, and mental health professionals. Phoenix led the visitors to a corner of the ward where new volunteers were learning the basics of trauma support. The Steel Angels worked alongside psychology students, each teaching the other different aspects of recovery work. "See, that's what makes this special," Phoenix explained. "We're not just healing wounds. We're building bridges between communities that never would have connected otherwise." The day wound down with a demonstration of all the therapeutic techniques that would be showcased at the upcoming conference. The sound of healing conversations filled the air as trauma survivors, many who thought they'd never trust again, engaged in breakthrough sessions with their peer counselors. Sarah stood with Dr. Ramirez, watching the scene. "You know," she said, "when I suggested community service that night, I never imagined it would lead to this." "Sometimes," she replied, "people just need to be shown a different path. Your grandmother would be proud of what you started here." As the sun set, the healing horde gathered for their daily debrief. The healthcare executives had left with implementation plans to review, the news crews with their stories, but the real work continued. "Tomorrow we start with 10 new trauma survivors," Phoenix announced, "and we've got 5 new groups coming to learn our methods. Remember where we started, but focus on where we're going." The ward lights dimmed, but the spirit of transformation that had begun in a BBQ parking lot continued to grow, touching more lives with each passing day. 5 days before the national conference, the trauma ward buzzed with unprecedented energy. Morning light streamed through the windows, glinting off the awards and certifications that now lined the walls, each one telling a story not just of recovery but of personal transformation. "NBC News is here," Dr. Ramirez announced, watching a network van pull into the parking lot. "They're doing a national feature on the program." Phoenix adjusted her healing horde vest, now adorned with therapy certifications and recognition pins from various medical organizations. The nervous energy in her stance reminded Sarah of that night in the parking lot, but for entirely different reasons now. "Remember," Sarah advised, "just tell them the truth. Tell them how a fight that didn't happen led to a movement that did." The ward had been transformed for the media event. Before and after testimonials lined the walls, showing the progression of both patients and healers. The old Thunderbolt Riders patch hung beside current photos of the healing horde teaching, working, and changing lives. "What strikes me most," the NBC reporter observed, walking through with her camera crew, "is how organic this feels. This isn't just a treatment center." She stopped at a station where Jesse, the former street fighter, was demonstrating their latest therapeutic approach, a combination of traditional trauma care and street-smart survival skills. "The clinical knowledge is important," Jesse explained to the camera, her former rebellious attitude replaced by articulate professionalism. "But it's the human connection that makes it work. Each survivor has unique needs, unique challenges. We don't just treat trauma, we adapt our approach to individual stories." The camera panned to where Phoenix worked with a group of visiting outreach workers from 3 other states, teaching them the fundamentals of trauma-informed peer support. The scorpion tattoo on her neck was now partially covered by a certified trauma specialist badge. "Look at the balance system here," Phoenix demonstrated, her voice carrying the authority of experience. "It's not about what the trauma survivor can't handle. It's about reimagining what they can process differently." The burn victim, now a certified peer counselor herself, rolled through the ward, her healing journey becoming a symbol of the program's success. Featured in medical journals and psychiatric publications, her case had become a testament to the power of peer-supported trauma recovery. "When I first came here," she told the reporter, "I thought my life was over. These women didn't just help me heal my burns, they helped me find my purpose. Now I get to help others find theirs." The Steel Angels, now regular volunteers, worked alongside psychology students from 3 universities. The mixture of street knowledge and clinical expertise had produced innovations that impressed even veteran trauma specialists. "See how the peer support integration works with the clinical treatment plan," a professor explained to the camera. "This is doctoral-level psychology being developed by former gang members. It's revolutionary." Dr. Ramirez led the camera crew to her office, where walls were covered with letters from across the country. "We're receiving requests daily," she explained. "Trauma centers, rehabilitation facilities, even correctional institutions. They all want to know how to replicate this program." The reporter paused at a framed photograph showing the moment when everything changed. a still from the BBQ joint security camera, capturing Sarah and the Thunderbolt Riders in their confrontation. Beside it hung the citation from the sheriff's department commending Sarah's decision to seek rehabilitation over punishment that night. That evening, Phoenix told the camera, standing beside the photo, "We thought we were tough women. We thought respect came from fear. Lieutenant Mitchell could have shown us what real toughness looks like, but instead she showed us what real strength is." Outside, a convoy of motorcycles announced the arrival of more supporters. 300 female bikers from clubs across the state roared into the parking lot, many wearing Healing Horde support patches. They came carrying donations, supplies, and offers to help expand the program. "This is bigger than us now," Sarah observed, watching the crowd gather. "It's becoming a movement." The camera crew captured scenes of trauma survivors working through their recovery, each success story adding to the program's impact. A domestic violence survivor who hadn't spoken in months found her voice in group therapy. A veteran with severe PTSD learned to trust again, helping others understand the recovery process she and Jesse had developed. For the conference, the reporter asked, "How many success stories will be presenting?" 50 survivors, Phoenix answered proudly. Each one told they'd never recover. Each one proving that trauma is just an invitation to transform. The afternoon brought more visitors, representatives from mental health organizations, trauma recovery centers, and veteran support groups. They watched as the Healing Horde conducted their daily therapy sessions, teaching new volunteers the delicate balance of clinical knowledge and personal understanding. "The techniques are important," Jesse explained to a group of healthcare administrators, "but the real magic is in understanding each survivor's journey. These aren't just patients. They're warriors finding their way back to themselves." 11. As the sun began to set, Sarah found Phoenix in the ward office studying applications from other motorcycle clubs wanting to join the program. The stack of papers was thick with possibility. "You know," Phoenix said without looking up, "that night at the BBQ joint when you had every right to hurt us, you saw something we couldn't see in ourselves." "I saw potential," Sarah replied, "just like my grandmother would have. She always said the measure of a healer isn't in the wounds they treat, but in the lives they transform." The evening ended with a tradition that had evolved over the weeks. The Healing Horde gathered in a circle, sharing stories of progress and challenges. Survivors spoke about rediscovered strength, volunteers about found purpose, and former adversaries about transformed perspectives. "Tomorrow is the final preparation for the conference," Phoenix announced. "But remember, the conference is just a demonstration of what happens here every day. Real victory isn't in the show we put on, it's in the lives we help rebuild." The ward lights dimmed, but the spirit of what had grown there continued to shine. From a moment of potential violence had come a movement of definite healing, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from throwing punches, but from extending hands. As the camera crew packed up their equipment, the reporter made one final observation. This story began with bikers messing with the wrong nurse, but in the end, maybe they messed with exactly the right one, someone who could see beyond the surface to the potential beneath. Sarah looked around the ward one last time before leaving. Her grandmother's picture hung on the wall of honor, surrounded by photos of transformed lives and restored spirits. Sometimes, she thought, the greatest battles are won not by fighting but by showing others a better way to be strong. The conference day dawned clear and crisp. The morning sun glinted off the newly renovated trauma center, where 50 success stories would soon share their journeys. Phoenix, dressed in professional attire beneath her Healing Horde vest, made final adjustments to her presentation materials. "Nervous?" Sarah asked, approaching in her dress uniform. "Not about speaking," Phoenix replied, smiling. "Just hoping we show people what's really possible when you give someone a chance." The Healing Horde arrived together, their leather vests now adorned with therapy certifications and their new logo, a phoenix rising from broken chains. Phoenix led them, carrying a banner that read, "Healing Through Understanding." The conference hall filled with healthcare professionals, administrators, and journalists from across the country. The story of the Healing Horde had caught national attention, becoming more than just a local success story. This was about transformation on a larger scale. Dr. Ramirez emerged from her office carrying a surprise. Before they began, she announced there was something they needed to see. She unveiled a large framed document, official recognition from the Department of Health and Human Services, acknowledging the program as a national model for trauma-informed peer support. This isn't just about today's conference, she continued. Thanks to you, 50 other trauma centers are launching similar programs. What started in a BBQ parking lot is becoming a nationwide movement. The Steel Angels, now certified peer counselors themselves, helped organize the presentation materials. Their leader, once known for causing trouble, now wore a vest identifying her as a program trainer. "Remember that night," she said to Phoenix, "when we first heard about what happened at the BBQ joint? Never thought we'd end up here." The morning of the conference unfolded with precision as 50 recovered trauma survivors prepared to share their stories. Sarah Mitchell watched from the podium as the hall filled with healthcare leaders from across the nation. "They're ready," Phoenix announced, now wearing her official trauma recovery specialist badge alongside her healing horde vest. The transformation in her bearing was complete, from gang leader to healing leader. The burn victim, now a keynote speaker, reviewed her notes one last time. "When I tell them how this program saved my life," she said, "I want them to understand it wasn't just about the medical care. It was about finding family in the most unexpected place." Dr. Ramirez approached the stage, carrying news that would change everything. "The National Institute of Mental Health just called," she announced quietly. "They're granting us $50 million to expand the program nationwide. They want trauma centers in every major city." As Phoenix prepared to address the packed auditorium, Sarah noticed how the former biker's hands steadied when she touched her therapy certification pins, just as they once steadied on motorcycle handlebars, but now for a completely different purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen," Phoenix began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "what you're about to hear isn't just a success story. It's a revolution in trauma care, born in a moment of confrontation but transformed into a movement of healing." The presentations unfolded throughout the day, each survivor's story adding to the growing evidence that this unconventional approach worked. Former gang members presented alongside psychiatric professionals, their combined knowledge creating a new paradigm in trauma recovery. "Look at their faces," Jesse whispered to Sarah as another success story brought the audience to tears. "They're not seeing ex-gang members anymore. They're seeing healers." The afternoon session focused on implementation strategies. Representatives from hospitals nationwide took detailed notes as the healing horde explained their methods for turning former adversaries into allies, pain into purpose. "The secret," Phoenix explained to the rapt audience, "isn't in forgetting who we were. It's in transforming those experiences into understanding. Every scar tells a story. Every struggle becomes a bridge to someone else's healing." Sarah stood for her closing remarks, the weight of her grandmother's legacy strong in her mind. "3 weeks ago, these women thought they were teaching me a lesson about strength," she told the silent hall. "Instead, they learned one about healing. And in that lesson, they found their true calling." As the conference concluded, the impact was immediate. 20 hospitals signed up for immediate program implementation. Motorcycle clubs from across the country pledged their support. What had begun as a confrontation in a BBQ parking lot had evolved into a national movement. The day ended with an unexpected ceremony. The governor arrived personally to present the healing horde with the state's highest civilian honor for community transformation. Phoenix accepted the award with tears in her eyes, her hands steady as she held the crystal memorial. "Remember who we were," she said to the assembled crowd. "But more importantly, remember who anyone can become when they're given the chance to heal instead of hurt." 1 month after the conference, the transformation was in full swing. Trauma centers across the country had begun implementing the healing horde model, but the original ward remained the heart of the movement. Phoenix stood before a new group of recruits, former gang members, street survivors, and bikers from across the nation, all seeking to become trauma recovery specialists. "Your past isn't your destiny," she told them. "It's your tool for understanding others' pain." Sarah watched from the observation room as Jesse led an advanced training session on integrating street wisdom with clinical care. The former knife fighter now moved with the precision of a skilled therapist, her hands steady as she demonstrated grounding techniques. "The Department of Justice called," Dr. Ramirez announced during the morning briefing. "They want to implement our program in women's correctional facilities. They're seeing the potential for rehabilitation through peer support." The burn victim, now heading her own training division, worked with a group of new survivors. "Remember," she said, pointing to her scars, "these aren't markers of weakness, they're proof that healing is possible." The afternoon brought a special visitor, a renowned trauma psychiatrist who had initially dismissed the program as unorthodox. She watched in amazement as former gang members conducted therapy sessions with a skill that rivaled veteran professionals. "I've been treating trauma for 30 years, she admitted to Sarah, "but I've never seen connections form this quickly. Trust build this strongly. You've revolutionized the field." Phoenix, overhearing this, shook her head. "We haven't revolutionized anything," she replied. "We've just shown that sometimes the best healers are the ones who needed healing themselves." As evening approached, the healing horde gathered for their expanded training program. Hundreds of new recruits filled the auditorium, each wearing their original club vests now modified, with medical training patches. "Look at this," Sarah said to Dr. Ramirez, gesturing to the crowd. "A month ago, these women were enemies on the street. Now they're studying trauma care together." The night concluded with a ceremony that had become tradition, new trauma survivors sharing their first breakthrough moments. Each story reinforced what the program had proven. That transformation wasn't just possible, it was contagious. "You know what's remarkable?" Phoenix said to Sarah as they watched the ceremony. "That night at the BBQ joint, we thought we were going to teach you about fear. Instead, you taught us about hope." Sarah smiled, touching the combat medic patch she still carried. "Sometimes," she replied, "the best way to stop a fight is to show someone what they could become instead." As the new recruits filed out, their voices filled with purpose and plans, Sarah thought about her grandmother's words. "Healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about revealing the strength that was always there." The one-year anniversary of the BBQ joint incident arrived on a bright morning. The trauma center, now a national training hub, hummed with activity. 50 satellite programs across the country connected via video conference as Sarah took the podium. "1 year ago, we witnessed how a moment of confrontation could transform into a lifetime of healing," she began. "Today we celebrate not just our success, but the birth of a movement." The statistics spoke volumes. Over 5,000 trauma survivors treated, 300 former gang members transformed into certified peer counselors, and a revolutionary approach to trauma care that had caught the attention of the World Health Organization. Phoenix, now the program's national director, presented alongside leading psychiatrists at medical conferences. The Healing Horde model had been adopted by military hospitals, veteran centers, and civilian trauma units worldwide. "Our newest initiative," Phoenix announced to the assembled crowd, "focuses on preventive intervention. We're taking our program to the streets, reaching potential trouble spots before violence erupts." Jesse, heading the Preventive Outreach Division, demonstrated their latest approach. "We're not just stopping fights," she explained. "We're channeling that energy into healing. Every confrontation becomes an opportunity for transformation." The burn victim, now Dr. Martinez after completing her psychology degree, supervised the training of new peer counselors. "This program didn't just save my life," she told the gathering. "It showed me how to help others save theirs." Sarah found Phoenix in the memorial garden they'd built outside the center. Names of transformed lives lined the walls, each one a testament to the power of understanding over violence. "You know," Phoenix said, touching the frame that still held their old Thunderbolt Riders patch, "that night at the BBQ joint wasn't an ending, it was a beginning." As sunset painted the sky, the Healing Horde gathered one final time that day. New recruits stood alongside veteran peer counselors, their vests showing the evolution from street fighters to healers. "Remember," Sarah told them, True strength isn't in the fights we win, but in the lives we transform. Every day, we prove that the greatest power lies not in causing pain, but in healing it. The trauma center lights dimmed, but the movement they'd started continued to grow, spreading hope and healing across the nation. What had begun as a confrontation in a BBQ parking lot had become a revolution in trauma care, proving that sometimes the wrong people to mess with turn out to be exactly the right ones to change the world. The night ended with a tradition born from that fateful evening: new peer counselors leading their first therapy sessions, while former adversaries shared stories of transformation. In the end, they had all learned the same lesson: that true healing comes not from the strength to hurt, but from the courage to help. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.